Hello and welcome back to the Agati Video Podcast. This is a space where we host conversations with different architects, designers, and industry thought leaders to help educate you in your work. My name is Joe Agati, and I'm the COO and Director of Design here at Agati Furniture. For today's episode of the podcast, we have Dawson Frank, a project development manager at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, a top 10 U.S. airport serving nearly 52 million travelers in 2019. Dawson has many years of experience in a variety of aviation roles. We've actually worked together on a few projects in the past. Welcome to the podcast today, Dawson. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Joe. Happy to be here.
I was going through our list of questions here, and the first one that kind of popped up was, sounds like you've got a background in private aviation, at least. You have a pilot's license as of 2007?
That's correct. When I was fortunate enough to attend Purdue University for my bachelor's degree, and I was able to get my private pilot's license as an elective there. So the ground school and flight. So I learned to fly in West Lafayette, Indiana. It's actually a funny story. I was an intern at Kansas City Airport to start off my career, and our operations manager, Dave Bowen, gave me 3 pieces of advice when I finished my internship. He said, get a private pilot's license, get an accredited airport executive designation from the American Association of Airport Executives. And he said to learn to play golf.
Do you play golf?
That's the one I didn't check off the box really well. I've gone to the driving range a couple of times, but I'm by no means a golfer. I love being outdoors, but so the pilot's license has served me well, but I don't fly hardly at all. So it was a little too expensive when I started my career to fly.
Fair enough. I can relate to that. You know, what's really funny, for many of the years that we've kind of worked together, I never knew that. I went to Purdue. I got my private pilot's license in 2002 there. After that, I went to University of Illinois to do my design work. But when I went there, I had, aspirations of going to the Air Force, being a pilot, maybe getting aeronautical engineering degree, then kind of switch course sophomore year to focus on design and product development.
Well, that's very similar because I switched sophomore year after my internship to aviation administration and focused just on airports. So that's cool. A small world.
Wow. So you graduated from Purdue then?
Oh, yes, in 2008. So in Champaign-Urbana, I've had many good friends there. That's actually my first solo flight, I believe, was to Champaign. So nice. Is a close place in my heart as well.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Cool. Very interesting. Well, I'm glad I started with that. Very small world. Well, beyond getting your private pilot's license, you've had a number of roles. Do you want to tell us kind of how you got here today?
Sure. Aviation is a great industry. And again, as I mentioned, I started with a business degree. Then after a summer internship at Kansas City's airport, I said, I love airplanes. I always have. A couple of things kept me from flying commercially or professionally. But the realizing airports are a career opportunity and career path really clicked. And I loved my internship. I was hooked after spending a summer riding along with our operations department. And so I switched my major. When I graduated, it was just at the start of the 2008 recession. And so I applied to every airport that was a nice destination, any place tropical, any place. And I ended up going to Fort Myers, Florida, which is RSW, which is Southwest Florida International Airport. The role I started in was an airport operations agent, which is a whole balance of the entire airport. That's the land side, the roadways, the terminal, and the airfield. So any incidents, any maintenance issues, any accidents or emergencies or customer complaints, we were the frontline staff responding and helping people out. And the smaller airports, you do so many things that really gave me a great understanding of how an airport operates. And then often you have to move to move up. So I moved to San Antonio's airport as an airport operations supervisor, where we really focused on the airfield component, how construction occurs, our safety and certification program, how we maintain our requirements that the FAA has an airport operate by as an airfield facility. As I progressed there, I really wanted to be hands-on on emergency preparedness. And so I volunteered to do some of our annual emergency tabletop exercises that every airport has to do, again, as part of that certification with the FAA. And one day I got a tap on my shoulder from our assistant director, Tim O'Cronley, who's now with a consulting company, but to ask if I could be the security manager till they filled the position as an interim basis. So now the next week I'm reporting to our security office with 46 staff members and our badge and ID office and our compliance. And it really opened my eyes that something I never thought myself doing career-wise. I always imagined it would be airport operations and administration, but I really realized that, never turn down an opportunity just because it's not in your comfort zone.
Yeah.
I was fortunate. San Antonio was very helpful, helping pursue accreditations and trying to be not just the best in U.S. industry, but try and really strive to be the best in some of our international practices or best practices. And so as I finished my time as a security manager, I was very candid with my boss that I was happy with the experience, but I didn't think we were prepared enough for emergencies. And again, be careful what you wish for, because within short order, I was the designated emergency manager, which was first a temporary, then a permanent position where I started from scratch, making sure we had our emergency plans, exercises, and staff training was all under my purview. And it was something that leading up to every 3 years, an airport has to do a full-scale emergency exercise. So I used to coordinate those with over 500 participants, volunteers, community partners, and staff members. That you really get to work with all the different acronyms or alphabet soup, your FAA, your NTSB, TSA, the FBI. Get to work with a lot of community partners and highlight that an airport's not just a business, but we're practicing for emergencies because we have to work together responding to them. And finally, that led me to Seattle, where I am today at the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. It's owned and operated by the Port of Seattle. You may hear me reference the port, but basically I wanted to come work at a busier airport. This is the 8th busiest airport in the country. And I came here again in the front line as an airport duty manager, which focused, again, the frontline staff responding to emergencies and incidents. But I really focused on some new things here, which was snow removal and response, and our low visibility or foggy day responses. And again, I always like working on projects and helping try and find new solutions to our existing issues. So that has led me to promote to my current position, which is a project development manager. And so my focus now is terminal projects, making sure that we have a say as airport operations in the facility. We're a very busy place that's landlocked. So anytime we want to build something new, we're tearing something down to build in its place. And so we have 100 capital projects that are active right now and dozens of tenant projects. And so my role is to review their plans and to make sure they work operationally. And then finally, I'm our seating, stanchion, and casework and millwork subject matter expert. So if we're replacing those items or maintaining them, I'm the lead for all of those.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting variety. I didn't realize you had such a background, especially at the early ones, in emergency kind of, you're saying emergency management and response. Like, give me an example, like when you're doing emergency preparedness, what's like a different emergency you're kind of preparing for?
Well, that's a great question. I had a great individual tell me, we're not really spending that much time on our Sharknado plan. We're really focusing on the basics. So in Texas, we focused on severe weather. We had hailstorms, tornadoes, possibly earthquakes in the recent years. So we focused on natural disaster response, active shooter response, and aircraft emergencies. And in my time there, we used almost all of our plans. The active shooter, unfortunately, they had an incident within the last 2 years where only the shooter was involved in being hurt. But it is many different aspects you're preparing for and training your staff to be ready for.
Yeah. So you say, how does the training, like, how do you guys prepare and train for that? You're saying there's like a table kind of discussion or something? So
I think 2016, right before I left to come to Seattle, we started doing annual required mandatory training. So you cover the basics. We took two aspects of it. Active shooter training for our general staff members, which is following the principle run, hide, fight. Those run first if you can, hide if you can't, and then fight as a last resort. So we cover that with all of our employees, where to evacuate to, what to do. And then we focused a lot with our responders of what the police and the surrounding mutual aid responders expected from us, how to coordinate it. And then a lot of it is the communication, making sure that the airport can communicate with dozens, sometimes hundreds of responding outside agencies.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So switching topics just a little bit here. So you've kind of had an interesting journey. I guess what's been the biggest kind of challenge you've had to overcome or barrier you've kind of had to break through to kind of get where you are today?
Well, I always like to focus on the positive. So I would say the biggest barrier or thing to put together was a full-scale emergency exercise. My work with all of our community partners and starting in my position there in emergency management was able to be addressed. I was nominated for our airport business magazine's 40 Under 40 when I was in San Antonio, which is always great to highlight the hard work that many people in my industry do and all the very creative and very progressive things people are doing industry-wide. But for me, working with so many different individuals and different community partners, because for our exercise was the most rewarding and biggest barrier to overcome, because it is all working towards a day to make a FAA requirement of practicing your emergency plan come together. But doing it's how you get there. It's like anything else. The journey is probably more important than the destination, to make sure that we work with our community partners to make sure we could talk to them on our radios, that they knew where to respond to, that we are also helping them in providing different things if they had any, I wouldn't say incidents, but if they had any missteps or needed space or collaboration. I would say the partnerships I built there in the last 3 years was one of the most satisfying things I've ever done.
What would you say the biggest kind of challenge is in your current role today?
My current role is keeping up with the growth and keeping up with just the sheer volume. I mentioned we're landlocked here in Seattle. So we are probably 5 to 10 years out at the earliest of ever considering a new terminal. So we are trying to make as much happen as possible as we can in the space we're allocated. So as new airlines want to start service here, as our new international arrivals facility, a giant capital project we'll be wrapping up this spring, opens up, we're only going to grow more, just like any airport in the country. And because of that, we see extreme usage of every part of our airport. So we really try and find stanchions, seats, materials, casework that can see use in, I have to say abuse, because that is the nature of the beast. We, on a busy day in the summer, 70 to 75,000 passengers fly out a day, same number fly in. So that's, I think I looked it up. That's for reference. That's Renton, Washington, Naperville, Illinois, or Hollywood, Florida, in and out of this place every single day in our busy summer months. So anything gets worn down, beat up, and constantly needs addressing. And we're always trying to figure out how to make sure our facility is convenient and as easy to go through as possible.
Yeah. So, I mean, you and I have talked a little bit about this too. And I think a lot of people struggle. Like, it's rare I get to work with like a facility, someone from the facility side, like yourself, so closely on some projects. And I know you've tried to, I wouldn't call it struggle, but you've definitely tried to find ways to evaluate, to deal with what you're talking about, that extreme use. Could you share some of like what you do and what process, like how do you guys go about trying to figure out to see what's going to work for you?
Sure. The first step for the aviation industry is probably not unique. We always ask what everybody else is doing. So any problem we have, stanchions, or I'll use the example of seating. We do that. Some of the seats we've chosen in the past just haven't lasted that well or haven't held up to that many passengers or lounge customers going through in a given day. So we asked the 30 large hub or largest airports in the country what seating they used in the different areas of their airport, what materials they used, and things of that nature. And their feedback really opened our eyes to some things, products we hadn't heard of before. We saw what our local state contractors offered. And then we also reached out to manufacturers such as yourself and asked what works, what doesn't work, and had a lot of candid discussions of, hey, these units have to last. What's actually been tried or proven on them. we are always willing to test some new things out, but seating and fabrics and materials, we don't necessarily want to be the guinea pig for. We'd rather try and find something that's working and have a successful product before we really lean into too many cutting edge or new ideas here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the main reason for that is I would say so many pieces or parts of their interchangeability or wear and tear. We want to make sure that seats don't fall apart when somebody's leaning back on them or if they're attached to the floor. And that's why we've really leaned forward after talking to manufacturers, and we tried buying sample units, and we put them by our TSA checkpoints, the busiest part of the airport, and saw how they did. And the final thing I'll mention from that is actually testing the furniture. While it answered many questions, it raised just as many more for somebody. I would highly encourage somebody to test a unit out if they're considering purchasing them, just to really see how that goes. We thought wooden benches would be the solution for a nice look at our checkpoints, but come to find out, luggage wheelchairs and luggage carts scratch them up faster than any other piece of furniture, and they actually looked worse than powder-coated metal and vinyl. So we came up with realizing that aesthetically, we couldn't find the look long-term after we put them in use for 2-3 months.
Yeah, no, that's really smart. I mean, there's a few clients that we work with in a variety of different industries that kind of go through that process. And I think they have that mindset. They're kind of committed to the journey versus like the individual project. And I know that's hard for people from time to time. You know, everybody's got these kind of outside constraints that they're dealing with and, you know, stakeholders that they have to satisfy. But I think it's interesting, like, you know, you have kind of that unique process of identify, test, evaluate, learn, iterate. I mean, it's kind of the same, like, you know, I relate to it because, you know, I'm in product development, and that's exactly what we do. I mean, it's literally just once we have an idea, build it up, test it, mock it up, and just rinse, repeat until we get the result we want. You know, University of Chicago follows a kind of same methodology, and it always seems to be really beneficial. But it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, like you guys are kind of bought into that from the beginning. Like, we know we've got something in the future. We need to do these tests now so that we can make a better informed decision later on.
Oh, most definitely. We have a pretty robust stakeholder group internally. Everybody has an opinion on seats because they are one of the things that everybody here that's flying out is going to use at the airport. You may not necessarily talk to an airline or airport staffer if you check in on your phone, but you're most definitely going to sit someplace and go through our screening checkpoint. To the point, it's one of our benchmarks as part of our airport service quality. It's a score, the hold room comfort. And we're always trying to see how we've done in the past and how we can improve that score. And if we don't provide a seat that is comfortable but durable enough to last, if it's torn up or in bad shape, it's a negative experience. And then we also really are leaning into trying to provide opportunities for people to recharge their mobile devices. Power at every seat is a goal we strive to lean into, but it's a very difficult thing to accomplish. Yeah,
no, power is challenging. You know, you're dealing with infrastructure, you know, even buildings that are 10 years old. I think it was hard to imagine the foresight of like power consumption was going to be in a decade later. You did talk about, hold room comfort. Interesting. Like, how do you measure that? Like, what do you guys do to measure that?
So the airport service quality involves surveying your passengers every quarter. So we actually have enough surveys being done that we have dedicated staffers that go around. Sometimes it's contracted out by some smaller airports to have surveyors come in and ask passengers what they think and what they feel. And so that gives you a general baseline, but it's the comfort of the hold room. So if you're sitting there and you can't find a seat at your gate and you sit a couple gates down, you're going to be nervous unless there's good paging announcements, unless there's flight information screens, or the Wi-Fi is good enough on your phone that you can check your flight to make sure it hasn't moved or that they haven't gone earlier or anything else of that nature. So it's a whole package of how comfortable you are. And that's where I give a lot of credit to our design architects to really map out each concourse and how they want it to feel. They consider each concourse we have as a neighborhood. And so they each have a little different look and feel. So if you see a picture of a gate, besides the gate number in it, we could probably tell you which concourse it is in exactly because of the look and feel of it. And that's most highlighted by our North Satellite that was just renovated and opened up this summer. That is a very impressive looking facility with some great art pieces incorporated in it as well.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I like that neighborhood feel.
There's a trade-off. That means my architects want different color seats in every concourse, which makes it a little tough for maintainability. But when you see the big picture, I can respect the complexity of it.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm kind of glad you brought that up. That's one thing that I kind of talk with folks about it's that maintainability kind of component. And, it's tricky. Like the variety is great because it kind of breaks up the space, but then you start to work against yourself because it's like, well, from a simplicity, maintenance perspective, like uniformity is really beneficial because anytime something breaks, things are more interchangeable. Like, how do you balance that out?
Oh, well, we have a good partnership and I have some tremendous architects again. So we've discussed it over time. And as we've highlighted every quarter, we have a seating meeting to discuss our status and what's going where, capital projects, trends or issues. And so in all of our discussions there, we've kind of narrowed it down to about 6 basic colors. And ask me in a year if we still have the same philosophy, but we're trying to make 6 colors work universally. So there are some different blends, but we are finding a balance that is reasonable for reupholstering or any sort of damage or replacement if we add new units to a different location.
Interesting. That makes sense. So I can't let you kind of get away with me not asking about COVID and how COVID's affected you guys. And I think, since we've we're getting into year 2 of kind of pandemic situation, I guess I'd be really curious to know, that now with kind of 2 years of learning under your belt, and like you said, you guys are landlocked. So ability to kind of change things is kind of like you got to stay within your land area, you're ripping things down. How do you kind of like think about the future, taking into maybe things like a COVID type situation and maybe like a short-term trend? How do you kind of try and factor that into like long-term planning?
Well, we were in a unique position with the Port of Seattle, something that I can't credit most of airports having the opportunity. We had enough project underway or the foresight to say COVID, while it is a very significant event to the nation, the world, our industry, that the growth will come back. So a lot of our capital projects move forward, but we did halt or shelve some of them. Many of them move forward and we're able to accelerate or finish earlier. Our biggest limitation is, again, we're so busy. A lot of our major construction's occurring on the off hours, 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. So some projects were able to gain 6 months, a year's time by not having those limitations. Similarly, we sped up and tried a lot of new things. We tried new touchless technology related to our ticket counters. We've tried UV disinfectants. We tried air purifiers using ionization. And a lot of those things, we were the leading edge and sometimes the bleeding edge, things that weren't necessarily proven or didn't necessarily turn out to be very fruitful. But we also tied in a local subject matter expert. The University of Washington has a chief epidemiologist, Dr. John Lynch, that was able to provide a couple of reviews of our facility to provide suggestions. And so a lot of things we incorporated, I think we'll probably keep permanently. Hand sanitizer units, plastic protective barriers at some key locations, especially our credential center or some of our ticket counters, and some different signage or processes or air filters for the facility and our train system that connects our concourses. Those have all been increased to make sure that we're providing good, clean air. You can disinfect your hands after going down an escalator, because a lot of the very complex or technology-driven solutions were helpful, but were not very beneficial or practical for a widespread application. But some of the innovations we tried, I would say the one that we're most excited about long-term is virtual queuing. We wanted to figure out how we could help people get through our checkpoints and improve their anxiety levels or their experience, and also to kind of reduce our morning peak, or our busiest hour of the day is usually between 9 and 11 in the morning. That's when the most passengers go through the checkpoints, and our lines can be the longest, or at least the most volume. And so I describe it as like if you go to the DMV, it was take a number and then it was on your phone that you could sign in and get text alerts. Well, you're signing up for a 15-minute slot to go through the screening checkpoint. So a customer, if you are very anxious or if you now have a time slot that you'll go through security, and that's one less thing to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
For the airport, we see value in you could take that time if you get to the airport earlier, maybe walk around, maybe buy something from a concessionaire or check out some of our art displays and have a good experience.
Yeah.
And then we also see value in helping. This can help focus some of the passengers that may show up 3 or 4 hours before their flight because of that anxiety. And instead they could do that, but they can avoid that busiest time of the morning unnecessarily. So we did a pilot this year, and we'll fund it through 2022 and see how it goes. It is still a learning curve, and we hope to eventually have electronic gates that passengers are going through instead of staff positions to really streamline this experience of checkpoints.
What would be electronic gates then?
At the entrance to the checkpoint, you'd scan a QR code or something on your mobile device, and that would say that your authentication to go through the checkpoint. In some ways, it'll probably be a segue into the future where biometric technology, your face or your eyes are your identification.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had not come across that. That could have a lot of real kind of architectural space planning kind of implications. It seems like the model is let's get, the dwell time is growing. So let's get them all onto airside and get them comfortable feeling, snacks, concessions, shopping, whatever on airside. But it's almost like if you have this other side, if you can queue, or got to get a slot ahead of time, you can bring a lot more of that over onto what would be the land side or, pre-security side of things. That's really fascinating. And that's fine that you're finding that's working out well. You're going to try it into next year.
Yes. There are some limitations. There's only so many people you can go through this dedicated line that doesn't start detracting from your main security line. But for us, it's all again about the customer experience. We have other things that are technology based, like you can do advanced reservation of a parking spot. So you could check in, get a parking spot, have a security slot time, and then hopefully using our app or your airline's app, get directions to your gate all with your phone. And in that process, we have the ability to highlight again the art pieces, the fastest way to your gate, and the time involved. And we hope to also tie in some advertising or connections to our concessionaires, or we also have a delivery of food. Grab app will have a person or a robot deliver food to you at your gate. So if we can package that all in there, it all gives you an opportunity to enjoy your time at Seattle a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting because I am one of those people that I show up way earlier than I need to for my flights. Luckily, my wife and my family are very accommodating of my issues. But I joke, I'm going to be the guy, and it gets progressively worse as I get older. I'm going to be the guy across the street in the hotel 2 nights before my flight, just so I don't miss it. I think we'll have to schedule another time to kind of check in on that. That's really interesting.
Most definitely.
So speaking of stuff you tried, you kind of went through a number of things that sound like they work really well. I'd just be curious, if you could share maybe with folks about things that you tried that maybe didn't kind of live up to expectations or didn't work for you guys.
Yes, there was a couple things that making sure what was being sold to us was being what was delivered. That wasn't always the case. There are some things that if you use automated cleaning of escalator handrails, that there was a good chance that disinfectant you're using would really shorten the life of your escalator handrails themselves. The UV lights, we would really love for them to be built into our TSA lanes to disinfect the bins, but there's always safety concerns, making sure the UV light is definitely well protected so it doesn't burn people or impact their eyes. And we really had a desire to put in plexiglass barriers at our checkpoints to try and protect people as sneeze guards. But studies from both the University of Washington and some other European studies highlighted that moving the air through to keep good, positive, fresh air in the terminal is universally more beneficial. If we put in plexiglass down every row and every line, it could actually, the person in front of you could sneeze and it could just linger, and everybody walking after them could walk through it, actually making the problem worse. So additionally, this summer, we shifted from putting physical distancing signs out. We had 7,000 signs and decals spacing people out. With the state of Washington and federal guidance, we removed those and have kind of shifted more into mask usage, washing your hands, and vaccinations to make sure that we see that as the solution to the long-term issue of COVID-19.
Interesting. I appreciate you sharing that with us, because I know everybody's trying a number of things. And, I think that's the real struggle, is like, you're kind of in the, new world. And so, like, in some of our other markets, like usually we kind of tell people, like, hey, when things are in flux, things are not as clearly defined. Like, flexibility is really key, but that's kind of challenging in the aviation market, because it's not like you just like pick up stuff and move it around real easily. It's like, that's like almost like the land of permanence to some degree, kind of making changes there. So it's interesting. And I appreciate you sharing kind of some of the learnings that you've kind of gone through over the last year. So as you kind of go and thinking about the next 10 years with Seattle and aviation, what are you guys looking to look at, implement, and do?
Well, our biggest issue is not unique. It's space again, and increasing passenger volumes. We, I think, went from 37 million passengers a year to about 51 million passengers a year in very short order. So airports are getting busier. There's a desire to travel for business and leisure. And so again, we are trying to understand how we can increase our passenger volumes without giant capital expenditures, trying to avoid building new gates, new concourses, new ticket counters. And how can we do more with the same amount of space? So again, that's where virtual queuing or new touchless technology is definitely something we're leaning into and trying to evaluate what we can do in the future. One of our biggest changes over time is not unique, is common use gates. So making sure our equipment is almost any airline can use it. The analogy I give is kind of like a library computer. Any airline can log into it. It may not be as quick or exact as their computer at home, but they're able to do any processes, print bag tags, print boarding passes out of them. So any airline can operate out of any gate. So versus Acme Airlines only having 3 flights a day and having a ticket counter and a gate assigned to them, now we have many different airlines sharing that same gate, so it's used as much as practical. So for us, we're also trying to find innovative ways to help you check in prior to getting to the ticket counter. If you don't need to check luggage, we definitely have lots of kiosks in our garage and our rental car facility at ticketing, so you can check in and really avoid any lines or waits. And then we also really want to lean into future usage. Self-tag, self-bag drop is something that's not new. It's been around for a decade, different airports, but we have not yet installed it here, and we're trying to find a suitable spot, either with the airport projects or possibly with one of our carriers, Alaska Airlines, as part of a redevelopment. But the concept there is similar to grocery stores, where you have your self-checkout, where you are going to a kiosk, you're getting your boarding pass, you're printing a bag tag, and then you're going to this self-bag drop machine, and you are putting the bag on the bag belt itself, it's weighing it, and it's taking away. Ultimately, with the future also being biometric, as I alluded to, that customs for international arriving passengers is using your face as your identification. So you show your passport, and your a camera scans your face as you're checking in. And then through a lot of the rest of your travel, your face is your identification. They're not asking for your passport. And TSA, and I believe, is piloting that, as well as Atlanta with Delta. So if we're able to have it efficiently, that as you walk up to like a self bag drop machine, your face is your identification, we may not have to have staff at every location, or it may not have to be Alaska's check-in area. It could be any universal common use check-in location. So for us, there are many different things we're trying out as well, but those will probably be the biggest impact to us as you're getting through the checkpoint. Additionally, we are constantly working with TSA to evaluate their newest screening technology for their TSA screening checkpoints at the gates, to make sure that we have the most effective for security measures, but also the most efficient.
Interesting. So that's a lot on the passenger side, obviously increasing it. Obviously, when the passenger side increases, you're going to have the airplane side increase. Since you guys are kind of locked into like a land footprint, how do you manage with literally more planes coming in at a potentially a higher frequency or something like that? When you're landlocked, what are your options, I guess?
We took two main approaches, and the thing we have going for us in general is we still have 3 runways, so plenty of capacity for runways and taxiways. It's the gate space that's the biggest limitation.
Yeah.
So for us, we have squeezed in as much as possible. So we will add one additional gate. We're able to put in one additional jet bridge with Delta Airlines in the near future to this is the last space we could squeeze in on the ramp. And then we had the foresight several years back to realize that either all this construction we're doing or future expansion, we have large cargo ramps that aren't connected to our terminal. And we have built out hard stand busing operations, which is a model in Europe and I think many different countries in South and Central America, where you're taking a bus to your aircraft, taking in our case, a ramp up to the aircraft and loading up and going from there. So we get to leverage all these parking spots away from the terminal.
Yeah.
Still have a pretty high level of service with the buses, but it definitely means that in a small footprint of a couple bus turnarounds, we're able to provide dozens of extra flights. We much prefer those to be the smaller regional aircraft with less people on them versus a big international carrier. So there's always a balance for our airline scheduling.
Interesting. Creative. Well, it's kind of we're wrapping up here today. I appreciate your time. I was just curious, it's been a challenging few years. You've had an obviously interesting career to get you to here. Is there any kind of words of wisdom or advice you can leave our listeners here?
I love innovation, but I would say common sense should always weigh out more than creativity. I had a furniture supplier tell me that they had not yet finished installing half of a school's furniture before the kids were jumping up and down on them. So I love furniture. I love the different concepts and things involved with them. But as I mentioned, everything that tells us we are only going to get busier as an airport. So we can't ignore the extreme usage our facility and our furniture and our supplies receive. So many different designers and different architects propose very unique and very great looking spaces and furniture that will never survive a very high use environment. So as much as we'd love to have very unique looking furniture concepts, we're still in some ways going back to the basics of making sure that we're able to buy things that parts can be replaced, that are durable, that we've tested and are reliable. And instead of just going with something that has worked at other non-similar locations. So always make sure you understand who your customer is and that you're addressing their needs.
It's good wisdom. Well, I really appreciate the time today. And thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Really appreciate it.